Rob, did you glue your peg into your dragon?
I did, and there's a reason for that. It's because I wanted to give it a quick primer before we
Yeah.
started, because I'll be painting that black. I always feel that the clear flying bases kind of distract a little, but if you just paint them black, your eye just mentally omits it. So it's really nice that they give you a clear acrylic base, but use the software your brain already has, right? All right. Well, then I guess I'll start with the first step, and the first step is to paint it red. So I'm going to take my Flesh Tear's red contrast paint, give it a good shake, and then everything that is not the kind of the belly scales. Um, he's kind of got these very pronounced scales on the belly around his neck. And then right there on like his little feet pads, I guess. And the actual fleshy bit and the wings. I'm just going to try to paint that all red. This will probably be the most time consuming part. And the trick for using contrast paints is to not thin them down and just go right from the pot onto the guy. Just really slather it on there. And if you accidentally get a little bit where you don't want it, that's fine. Just own it and keep going. I also find it useful to name these big pieces. As this is a big manly dragon, I'm going to give it the manliest name I know, and that's going to be Hank. And as you loyal viewers know, um, one of the tips I give when you have to paint a bunch of goons or like just people fillers is they're meant to die really fast. So don't blow yourself out in making every single detail painstakingly perfect. Because that's how you get a lot of burnout is you feel like you got to make every single scratch on the sword for skeleton number 8 perfect. They're gonna die. It's gonna be fast. No one's gonna notice. Um, and to really spend the time for the detail with these big showpiece models. So this is one that you might want to take some time on and make sure that some parts are just the way you want them because you're going to be looking at them a lot. I am using Citadel Shade Brush in medium. It's basically any sort of wide brush that can hold a lot of paint with a semi decent point on it. If you use like a big flat dry brush or makeup brush, you just don't have the control you need. And if you use a tiny little detail brush, this will take forever. In just a couple minutes, is that we got red on one side of the dragon. This would also be the part in the cooking show where I would pull one out and say we prepared this one earlier, but that would be cheating. Yeah, one of the important things to note if you have to brush prime the or brush paint these is you got to hit all of the little cracks, like right around the joints and stuff, because that white will really show through if you miss a spot. The spots that are getting me are kind of by his dragon armpits, trying to get the brush in there. And I'm pretty sure I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again, especially for this kind of model. Since you're not painting a two-dimensional picture, rotating it all over so it's just more comfortable for you to paint is pretty big. So it might feel awkward at first as your brain is trying to tell you no, you got to paint it at a static angle, but feel free to rotate it as much as needed. I am getting paint all over the wings accidentally, but that's okay because we're going to fix that up in a later step. So don't feel too pressured if you accidentally got red where you didn't mean to get it. And of course, it doesn't have to be red. It can be purple, green, whatever color dragon you want it to be. All right. So I should have my dragon mostly red at this point. I got all the spots I want red. And what you're going to want to do at this point is check over your work. There's inevitably going to be that one scale you missed, or right in the dragon crotch area, you forgot to get a little bit of red, like I did right here. Because it's easy to fix it now rather than go back later. With contrast paints in particular, they work best kind of only applied once. If you have to keep going back and putting more and more paint over your work, the effect will diminish. So you kind of want to hit it on your first pass. It's okay if you don't, but just a little more consistent result. All right. So I am going to let that dry. Contrast paints usually take a couple more minutes than you're used to working with regular acrylics. This is a fine time to get a snack, contemplate your dragon life, make a backstory for your dragon, kind of wonder where Hank is gone, what he aspires to be. Well, my dragon is still drying, but in this point, I am going to work on the base real quick. I'm going to just hit it with some Signor Brown, and we're just going to make it a standard brown muddy base, because maybe that's where Hank the dragon likes to hang out. And this is perfectly fine if you run up against the flying base if you want to make it black. If you don't want to and you want to keep it that see-through acrylic, you might want to tape it off. Or if you got any silly putty, put a layer of silly putty around it. And that way you don't accidentally paint it when you don't want to. I'll be painting mine black, as mentioned earlier, but just in case. And same technique as with the dragon, right from the pot, onto the base. Gooping is required. I am using Citadel Contrast Signor Brown. If you don't have that, any sort of earthy brown, something that looks like mud or earth. But it could very easily be a sand color if you want him to be a sand dragon. Yeah, since the contrast paints can get a little runny, it's good to make sure it's completely dry before you switch to another color that's going to run up next to it. All right, now this is, I'm going to admit, it's going to be the most tedious part. But all the spots that we accidentally hit that we didn't want to be in red, we're going to take our gray sear base, or whatever color matches closely to the undercoat, to the primer, and we're going to have to go over all of those spots again. So one thing you'll hopefully notice as the contrast kind of dries and you can kind of see the effect is that it's kind of automatically doing the shadowing and the highlighting for you. It will gather into all the recesses where the edges are going to be a little lighter because of how transparent the paint is. Which is why we have to do this whole undercoating thing at this stage, because if we paint right over it, you're going to see everything we've put underneath the paint. And it doesn't have to be perfect at this stage. One thing that I was always, I guess, surprised by, it was told to me, but I didn't really realize it until I started showing my models off to my friends, was the face is what a lot of people are going to gravitate towards immediately. So if your wings are not perfect, it's fine. But if your face is kind of off or looks a little weird, people are going to notice right away. Especially with these big showpiece boss monster type things. All right, I'm going to begin to start slathering on the skeleton horde. If you still need to clean up mistakes, that's fine. But essentially the next spot is every part we didn't hit in white is going to get hit with skeleton horde. Except for the nails on the feet and the little nails on the wings. Are those nails? Are they horns? So give your paint a good shake, and then same thing as before, we're going to goop it on there. And if you accidentally spill a little bit of the skeleton contrast onto the red you already worked on, That's fine. I haven't gotten as far as I did without picking up a couple of dirty tricks to fix my mistakes. So basically same technique as before. We're just gooping it on there. And if we notice we missed a spot, we just go right back over it. But we don't want to hit the same area too many times with the paint. The way I'm holding the dragon is so that the point of the wing um, is going to be down. So that way, if I put the contrast paint on there and it starts to kind of run down the wing, it's going to just gather right where the wing extends out so that all the shadow will gather in there. And then I'll just pull that paint back out through the wing. So I'm holding the dragon upside down, essentially. All right, I think I got the wings mostly painted. So now I'm going to move on to the belly scales. Yeah, it's a little bit on the tedious side, but it's a little faster than having to go in there with your first coat, your second coat, your highlight coat, your edge highlighting. And since we did the red parts first, if you accidentally spill a little bit of the skeleton horde over the spots you already painted, it won't show up as much. We'll just hide that. We won't tell anyone. All right, everyone's favorite time, drying time. Wash your brushes out, change your paint water. Now's a good time to do it, as it's just kind of literally watching paint dry. You're going to want the next step to be as dry as possible. All right, at this point, I'm going to go back to Sigor Brown, and I'm going to do all the nails and claws on the dragon. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the whole mouth with Sigor Brown, including the teeth and pretty much the whole palate there. And this is kind of a little more of an advanced technique. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that Sigor Brown and put a few brushfuls on my palette here. And then grab just a little bit of water with my brush, kind of move them together, and then going from the tip, make sure I got this in frame, going from the tip of the horn to about 2/3 the way down, I'm just going to carefully brush a little bit on there. Maybe use a little more water if you think you got a little too much brown. And what we're going to do is that's just going to kind of look like it's kind of a horn rather than just more scales. But you should still see kind of the red show through, and the brown should just kind of tint it and hide in the recesses. You can do this anywhere you wish. You could do it around the ears. You can do it on the spine crest on the back. Maybe I'll do that. But you're basically just adding a little bit of character to your dragon. And if it turns out you hate it, that's okay. You can just paint right over it. If you're feeling particularly brave, you can try to put this down the back spine. And then you can let a little bit of the brown kind of pool in the recesses between the body scales and those spine scales, and it'll kind of add a nice little shadow effect. And maybe our young red dragon's being a disobedient adolescent dragon. He doesn't wash behind his ears. He's got some mud or something caked back there. But a little earlier, Ryan was asking about what to do with some flash, or if you see mold lines, this is a good place to hide them, is you can use this darker brown to kind of shadow those up, and then it will sort of blend in with the surrounding details. Another place I'm going to use our little brown water mixture is around the armpits. Usually that part is a lot darker. Shadow is going to naturally want to go there. Your contrast paint should have picked that up, and naturally just the lighting in the room is going to put shadow there, but just to add a little more definition to show where his arms and legs kind of separate out from the body. And my wings are looking suitably dry here, so I am going to switch over to my dry brushing. And that will involve me grabbing not the biggest, nastiest brush I own for dry brushing, but something I feel I can have a little control when it gets closer to the edges. And if you haven't dry brushed before, the tip I always give is you want to pour the paint onto your palette, get some on your brush, and then wipe most of it off. And if you can paint the tips of your fingers and only your fingerprints are coming through, that's a good dry brush. If you're getting no paint, then you got no paint on your brush. And if you're gooping all over your fingers, you got to dry it off a little more. You got to get some more paint on your palette. So I'm gonna run with my Blanco Hueso, or my Bone White from Game Color here. But if you have anything that's kind of that, not an eggshell, that might be a little too bright, but almost like a aged parchment kind of look. Bleach Bone from Citadel, but this is kind of the color we're looking for. And I am going to then dry brush the wings. Grab your paint, put it on your brush, wipe a little off on your palette, a little on your paper towel here, test on your finger, and then you're good to go. I would recommend you do this on brushes you don't like as much anymore or have lost their points a long time ago, because this is going to be a brush killer. And we're aiming to kind of hit all the spots that we hit on the wings and try to pick out any highlights. And if you accidentally hit some of the scales, that's perfectly fine. We're going to fix that in the next step. So you can kind of see the difference between the two wings there. The right has the dry brush on it, and the left doesn't. So I'm just kind of making some of the highlights pop a little more. It's not a necessary step if you're just trying to get one of these guys hammered out, right before your D&D session. But it will really kind of add that extra bit. And technically, you could layer all of this paints on and just individually paint, each ridge or each fold in the wing with this bone color. But this is a paint and take, not a paint and start on. So we're hopefully going to have a finished dragon by the end of this. Now, if you accidentally zone out and hit some of the red scale bits, you might have been thinking about how your red dragon is going to eat all the adventurers tonight. That's also pretty easy to fix. We'll just take a little bit of red. I'm going to use Citadel's Wazdaka red, and we can clean those details up. I'm going to hit all the little feet with the dry brushing method. For the belly scales, I'm going to be taking that same bone white color, and I'm going to be layering paint all along the belly scales. Now, the contrast should be gathering into the ridges, and you should already kind of see a little highlight form on all the raised parts. So I'm just going to essentially do a couple of quick strokes about midway up the scale down to just kind of add a little more depth to the scale. So we'll do the first one here. Make sure my brush is nice and controllable. Good amount of water on the paint. You pretty much want to have it so there's no resistance going through the paint. And then starting with this guy here, I'm just going to be about halfway up the scale and go down. Going to form like a little triangle-esque shape. And you're just going to continue that all the way through the body. The chest ones are going to be the ones you want to hit the most if you want to skip a couple, because that's what's really going to show through. And this is where if you accidentally have a little bit of red paint that kind of spilled over onto these belly scales, this is a good place to hide them. Like I got a tiny little bit of red there, and now it's gone. And at this stage 2, I'm going to be painting all of his chin horns, the nails, the horn fingertip things on his wings. And from there, it's going to be starting at the tip of the tooth, we'll say, and then just bringing it up in a quick kind of feathering motion to bring the color up. So you want the tip to be as bright as possible, and then you want kind of the root to be that dark Sigor brown color. And if you use the feathering sort of brush motion where you're kind of flicking it almost forward, it's going to look like it's kind of growing naturally rather than he had it perfectly manicured before he got to his dungeon run. So we are going to move on to our earth tone wash, which I use Agrax Earthshade. And we're going to move on to hitting all the spots with the scales. We can use the same brush we used with the contrast paints, but you're okay if you want to water this down a little bit. So give it a good shake, and then we're just going to hit pretty much every area we hit with the bone effect. People refer to this as liquid talent. You'll see why. And it's really gonna bring it all together. So just dip our brush right in the pot. Maybe we'll just use it straight up. You can add 1 part water to 2 parts shade, but I like to use it just as is. And if you accidentally hit a little bit of the surrounding scales, that's fine because it's just gonna shade the scales a little bit. In fact, it might even look like you meant it to happen. And you might not want to go crazy on the wings. Try to hit maybe about a brush length from where the wing meets the arm, the red scale bit, just to kind of shade the area but not dominate it in the wash. But you do want to make sure you slather it right there on the nails and the horns and the tips of the wings. And it's not a race, but you will notice the wash starting to dry as you put it on there. So try not to have it pool in any one area for too long, because that pooling effect is going to look really weird when it dries. It's going to make like a little tide line. So you're going to almost notice like a bubble. And if that happens, you can try to go over it again with a little bit of the base color, and kind of start over. But it's usually easier to catch it now and just kind of spread the wash out. And this is another optional step. And if you're still working on the wash, that's fine. I'm going to kind of work around it as it dries. I'm going to take the bone white game color I was using before and off-white sort of, or any sort of eggshell color you might have. If you have pure white, it works, but it might look a little cartoony. And I'm going to take about a drop of each next to each other, and then I'm going to kind of blend them together with my paintbrush, so I can get kind of this in-between color, maybe a little more of the off-white than the bone white. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm pretty much just going to hit the tip of each of the horns, each of the nails, in the very most raised parts of the scales. If you don't feel like you have the brush control or the confidence to do it, I know you can do it. I believe in you. But just in case, this is kind of an optional step. But it's really going to make those details pop. So we're going to start with this guy right here, and just the very edge is all it's going to need. Where this effect is going to be the most pronounced is around the face region. So if there's one you really want to slow down and make sure that shadowing, that shading is getting right where you want it, or if you are doing the highlighting, this is where you want to slow down and take your time. All right, I think that's looking pretty good for my highlighting. Now, the next part, I'm just going to have to be honest. This is the part where everyone hates miniature painting. It's doing the painstakingly fine detail work. Thankfully, there's only one major spot we got to hit now, and that is the dragon eyes. What I'm going to use is I'm going to use a yellow. If you use the colors out of my suggested guide, you're going to want to hit the iris first, with the gray or a white, and then you're going to want to use Iandin yellow. Now I'm going to just use Citadel's Flash Gits yellow, but you want something nice and bright because we have dark red scales, and we want to have these like two piercing yellow eyes kind of peering out from them. We're going to get our yellow and shake it up, but if you have it available, a neat trick to do is you want to throw purple around the eye socket. It's going to help discolor it a little, and you'll be able to pick it out a little better. I'm going to do it real quick. If you don't have it, I didn't tell you to get it. This is completely if you have the paint available. But I have a little Drethruki violet here. Put 1 to 2 brush strokes around the eye. Again, and this is mostly because when people look at miniatures, they look right at the face. So we're going to grab our yellow. I'm going to grab a fine detail brush here. And one of the tips I was given is if you got to do this fine detail work is to imagine what the brush stroke is going to be ahead of time and do it on your exhale. It almost sounds like you're firing a rifle at maximum range or something like that, but it does help me. All right. Give Hank some eyes. We're going to give the yellow a minute to dry, and we're also going to put a little bit, this is going to probably be about 2 parts water to 1 part earth shade. We're going to shade those eyes as well. This way, if you get a little bit of the yellow on the eyelid, you might be able to hide it, or you can notice you did, and you can paint it over in the next step. Give that a second to dry, and then we go at it again with our yellow. And then for everyone's favorite part, it's the pupil. You can use a little bit of black Templar in the contrast paint. I'm just going to use normal black paint. The normal rule or helpful tip I give when painting eyeballs is to form a triangle shape. So you would start at the top of the eye of the eyeball, and then you would paint sort of a triangle down. It will look more natural at a further distance, and usually friendly or good guy models, you'll want to have nice, wide, open, kind of friendly looking eyes. But since this is an evil red dragon, we're going to do slits. That can add sort of an evil, almost demonic appearance, as if you just do a thin stripe right down looking at whatever he's going to be roasting. So if you need to practice on a piece of the palette here, just keep your brush nice and wet, and then just a single line, just down and down until you feel confident enough to go on the model, because once it's there, it's going to be hard to repaint the whole thing yellow and then do the iris again. But again, I believe in you. I know you can do it. If you don't want the iris, if you kind of like the glowing yellow effect, that's totally up to you. But here we go. We're going to get Hank the ability to see here. That is the majority of the dragon right there. Pretty much the next step I'm going to do here is I'm going to paint the flying base black. If you got a pure black, it's going to take a couple of coats, and then I'm going to just quick dry brush the little mound of dirt he's on. That can be any sort of earthy color you have, or if you want to do a different base, maybe it's just fallen stone from a dungeon. It could be sand. It could be kind of a grassy earth. Maybe you could throw a couple of patches of like terrain grass on there. But I'm just going to do mud. All right, now that I've gotten it to this stage, I've noticed a few spots on, especially the wings, where I over dry brushed and I hit them on accident. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another one of my detail brushes here, and I'm going to take Citadel's Wazdaka Red. You can use a lot of red paint, but I find the bright ones can kind of help in this stage, because usually wherever you overbrushed is one of the highlight points. So I'm going to give that a quick shake, and then what I'm going to do is I'm pretty much just going to take a very small amount, and I'm going to pretty much dot over my mistakes. And if you also feel like you want to highlight some of the little joints, you can do that in this stage as well. All of these techniques can be used for lizard people, anything with scales. It looks a little intimidating because you see all of these scales and you realize, man, how am I going to paint them all? And the answer is you're not. You're going to cheat and have a specialty paint do about 80% of the work for you. At this stage, I'm going to work on the flame effect. I think I recommended Ayandan Yellow, Griff Hound Orange, and then I think I used the same red. If you hadn't primed your flame effect ahead of time, it probably won't work out. As I'm going to show here, you can use the contrast paints over transparent effects, and you can get some really cool effects out of that, like stained glass or like a clear visor sort of effect, maybe even a hologram. But for this, I wanted to try to do kind of almost a cartoony-esque fire. What I'm going to do is I've grabbed my pre-primed flame effect and I'm going to put it in my specialty tweezers here. I would recommend you're just going to have to find something to hold these because it doesn't give you enough of a grip point to hold in that little peg. We are going to start with the yellow and work our way to the red. And about half, just color that all in yellow. Might look a little orangey at first. We're gonna do a couple of quick techniques to try to fix that. All right, now as that dries, we're gonna need to quickly clean our brush out and switch over to our contrast orange. You're gonna want to grab a lot of paint on this one because you're not going to be able to go back for seconds without cleaning your brush off, because we're going to do a blend right there on the model. So starting kind of about a third down, it's kind of got this bulbous area where I think the real tip of the flame is, kind of starting halfway through that. Just bring it down and mix it pretty much about a brush stroke into where you ended your yellow. And those should start to kind of mix together and you'll have this neat little blendy effect. Now, for the final bit, if you have Blood Angel's red, a nice bright vibrant red, you can use that. If you don't have it, we can use that Flesh Terror's red we used before. You might want to go back in there and hit a few spots with Wazdaka red. Go from the tip to about where that bulbous kind of fire region is on the effect. You can use this for anything that's fire related, but particularly when you have a big dragon, he's got to be breathing his fire. What you're trying to avoid is the rocket pop effect, where it goes red and then orange and then yellow. You want to bring all of the colors together. So a melted rocket pop. So we got something that looks a little like that. And this is going to seem weird, but you got to believe me on this, is you're going to want to put the very tip, you want black. If you have the Black Templar's black, that will work. I'm going to use pure black, and we're just going to put it right on the edge here. It's going to look where it's starting to kind of smoke up. All that starts to dry. The yellow is kind of already dried on me. I'm going to take my Flash Gits yellow and hit some of the top raised points. And you can change the colors out to be like blue fire or like green fire. Now with that black bit, we're going to grab our off-color white here. And with something with a good point on it, we're going to get in there and we're just going to put a couple of spots of that white into the black and kind of a little beyond it. That's going to look like that ember effect. And there we go. There is one young red painted dragon. What we were trying to accomplish is the contrast paint is going to be able to do a lot of the hard work. It's going to be able to do a lot of detail quickly. It's clearly not for every application. Large flat areas just won't work. You might have noticed that in some of the wing bits, but with a lot of these scales, it's great. With contrast paints, the transparency can be a huge bonus. Keep in mind that whatever you paint underneath it is going to show through. As far as additional details can go, you can go in there and dry brush it again with red. That would make each scale pop out a little more. You could individually highlight every scale. I'll see you sometime next year. And when it comes to adding any more details to it, you can always add scratches or divots or cuts. I used a little purple around the iris, but you can do that along the more fleshier bits, like along Hank's muscled wings. He's kind of got less scales. Or around the ridge on his back, if you want to do a bright red and then use a purple as kind of a shade, that would look really nice. But otherwise, that's your basic young red dragon.